Oh, wow. So small and such a blurry background. Is this the best YouTube lens for shooting in 4K with the Canon M50? I was super excited when the Avenir CCTV's 12mm f1.2 lens arrived in the post. I loved the packaging and I loved the size of this lens as I screwed it onto the Canon M50, and I thought this could be the lens that I use in all my YouTube clips. And then I shot with it and I was dismayed to find it has a massive vignette. And I left it in the cupboard for 6 months and only recently got it out because I thought it's time to get rid of it, pass it on, maybe someone else can use it. I gave it one last shot and here's what I discovered. Straight out of camera, the image looks like this with this wicked vignette. Because we're using it on YouTube, we're going to change the size of the frame and we're also going to change the lens distortion, and you'll notice it fixes up a lot of these issues very quickly. Of course, this is a manual focused lens, and with this angle of view I can reach out and adjust the focus and view that in the LCD screen on the M50. If I want a sharper background, I can change the aperture and change the shutter speed. Currently it's at 200. Drop it right back to 50. And now we'll start to see the background come into focus a little bit more. My ISO up around 500. Here I should have a good depth of focus. As you stop down the aperture to increase the depth of field, you also increase the size of the vignette. You can zoom in further, an extra 10 or 20%, and remove the vignette completely. This is much better than 1080p, but it does decrease the clarity overall, and I guess that's the point with this lens. I'm not sure this lens is really built for everything in focus. A couple of weird things about this lens, a couple of problems you may not have thought of. Firstly, the thread size is unusual. It's about 31mm, don't quote me on that exactly. This means that you won't be able to find a step-up ring very easily for it, and you won't be able to find an ND filter. You'll need an ND filter if you're shooting at the low apertures, or you need to adjust your shutter speed. I can deal with all of that, but it doesn't come with a lens cap, and that for me is the most annoying thing about this lens. It's not the sharpest lens, but we do get this massively blurry background and separation in the fields. If you want to see everything in focus, you can use this lens, but you're probably better off looking at other lenses or other cameras, like the DJI Osmo Action. It's magnificent low light, it's magnificent with a dark background. Right here, I have a light up above me, and you notice the vignetting quite strongly in the corners. But at night time, the edges are dark, and we get a different feel to this lens. You're looking at footage straight out of camera, there's no lens correction applied. This means we've still got the vignette, but you don't notice it. You can totally get away with this vignette, unless there's a white wall around. Same again, this time with a 10% lens correction and 120% scale. I'm not sure I'll use this as my full-time YouTube lens. I do know that there is something about it that is very nostalgic. It's like looking back in time, and we can increase that if we use the posterize effect under Premiere Pro. And we'll use that to introduce a jerkiness by reducing the frame rate on the clips. There is no in-lens stabilization. That kind of suits this style of footage. And there's no getting away from how beautiful this lens can be. Maybe this lens is a little creepy, like you're gonna get murdered by a bunch of geese. Yeah, it can be a little creepy, and maybe that's the magic of this lens, is the ability to create a mood. Maybe that mood is a little bit creepy. How does this compare to the 7 Artisan 7.5mm fisheye lens? Even though it's winter in Perth, it's incredibly bright and sunny today, which is the perfect time to test this lens against the 7 Artisan 7.5 and the kit lens that comes with the Canon M50, the 15 to 45mm. With such a bright day, I'm squinting. All of these lenses will be squinting. I'm going to get that aperture right down low so we can see as much in focus as we possibly can, and we can compare these lenses. Of course, 12mm sits halfway between 15mm and 7.5, so we should get a rounded view of all lenses. Generally, there's no need to do any lens correction at 15mm with the kit lens. Whereas with the 7.5 and the 12mm, you're generally going to need to apply lens correction, which means you're stretching the corners and you're softening them. There are times when you can get away without any lens correction with the 7.5, and in those cases, the entire frame looks really sharp. If you've seen my other video on the 7.5, you know I love this lens. So you might be asking yourself, well, why are you looking at the 12mm? Well, the 7.5mm, straight out of camera, is shooting 16.9 ratio, and my edges are pretty good on this lens, especially if I don't apply lens correction. So for me, the 7.5 is still a fantastic lens, potentially the best match for the Canon M50 when shooting in 4K. On YouTube, I'm using an aspect ratio of 2:1. Let's take a look at how that really benefits the 12mm. In the top left, we see the image straight out of camera, and in the right-hand side, the processed image. There are two key things to remember. Firstly, you need to set your sequence size. We can see the sequence size here is set to 3840 by 1920. To do that, we simply go File, New Sequence, choose RE, and RE 25 frames per second if that's what your M50 is set to. In your settings, you want to head over here and change the frame size. We're going to copy the frame size that we've got here, which is 3840 by 1920. That's the first step done. Once you've got your sequence ready, you can drag your files in, and you'll find that they've already cropped off the top and the bottom, and now it's simply a matter of adding the lens correction. I've got a preset, I'll throw it on top and adjust my effects. I think -17 is too much. I'm going to drop it back to -12, and we'll see the distortion from the post is reduced. It'll be more straight up and down, but we've got a little bit more of that vignetting occurring. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I've noticed that this image is a little off color, needs a little bit more saturation, so I'm going to bump my saturation quite high and make a reminder to myself to adjust that in camera. And that's how we get from the 16:9 ratio to the 2:1 ratio. We haven't finished yet. It's really key when we export that we also export in the 2:1 ratio. By default, it won't be set to that, so let's go ahead and do an export and set up our settings. I'm going to choose YouTube's 4K export and adjust the settings. Already we can see the height is out from our sequence. I'm going to click on match source, we've got our source matching. When we export like this, YouTube knows the exact dimensions and ratio of the height and width of your screen. YouTube can then tailor that to whatever device it's playing on, and you're going to get the best results. If instead you export at the default settings, you're definitely going to get that black bars. That's not what you want. A lot of people miss this crucial step. YouTube will render its videos the best it can to your display. By setting it as a 2:1 ratio, you get that view in your editing screen and you get it in your output, and YouTube knows that immediately. We're really letting YouTube decide what is the best way to display this size on any device. To test the difference in the background blurs, I need to open up my apertures. Here I'm using the 7.5mm 7 Artisans lens. All lenses will be at arm's length as if I'm vlogging. Next up, the kit lens at 15mm and an aperture of f3.5. This is a 12mm. The sun's just peeked out a little bit, but I'm largely in the shade, and yet I still had to put my shutter speed at 1/1000. That's because with this lens wide open, it lets in a ton of light. You should consider checking out my review of the 25mm and 35mm CCTV lenses. Just like this 12mm lens, those lenses are great for filming at night. The difference is that the 12mm is great for filming yourself, whereas the 25mm and the 35mm are good for filming other people, but really only useful for filming yourself if you're in a studio or you can be absolutely sure of nailing the focus. The 12mm is a lens that you can train on yourself and focus at the same time. One thing's for sure, it's absolutely unique. It's not perfect, and I see a lot of YouTubers attempting to use a perfect lens, and what this means is they all start to look the same. It may not be the sharpest lens, but we've got this massive contrast between the foreground and the background, and it makes the foreground appear even sharper. There is a softness to this lens, and some people would say, why would you use this lens if it has soft edges? Well, to me, the 4K sort of counteracts the softness. There is a massive difference between softness and pixelation. I'll always favor softness over 1080p pixelation. Thanks to everyone who's subscribed. In my next couple of videos, I'm going to cover picture profiles, which, just like this lens, are something that can be unique to you. Give a really distinct flavor. I'll see you then. Bye now. One last bonus before I go. Because I'm not using an ND filter on this lens and I've got my shutter speed at 1/250, on a bright sunny day you will notice that the highlights are blown out. You will have seen that earlier in the video. The way to get around this is to forecast some rain or just get into a darker environment. You don't get as much of that blown out, overexposed areas on the screen.